The following presentation was given on February 9th of 2014 at the UU Church of Berkeley Congregational Meeting. It's the Treasurer's Report. My name is Linda Laskowski, and I'm your friendly treasurer. You may not have expected the Treasurer's Report to be entitled Transforming the World and Changing Ourselves, but more about that later. Let's start with the formation of the UUCB Financial Advisory Council, which consists of Mac Lingo, Larry Nagel, Marianne Simpson, Grace Ulp, Sarah Roberts, Ira Nilkin, Lynn Hammond, Joe Maxon, Jenny McLean, and Ralph Nelson. These 10 people are part of a council whose purpose is to increase transparency in financial matters of the church, increase the general level of financial knowledge of the membership, and to ensure that church members' financial concerns are identified and addressed. So find any of them or me if you have any questions or concerns, and we'll do our best to address them. And about that title, if we have any hope of transforming the world and changing ourselves, we must be bold enough to step into our discomfort, brave enough to be clumsy there, loving enough to forgive ourselves and others. These words were from Prayer for Living Intention by Joe Cherry, who is the interim minister at Modesto. So what I'd like to do is invite you to step into our discomfort with me as we talk about the financial matters at the UU Church of Berkeley. Let's start with the financial results through December, which is for 6 months. Our revenues are currently underrunning $54,000, and this is primarily in pledge revenue. There's 2 reasons for this. One is we did have an optimistic forecast, which we predicted 5% over previous year, and in fact what's actually happened is that pledging is down 5%. Expenses are also underrunning, and when we put it all together, what could be a pretty major deficit has actually been reduced to about $15,000 so far, and this is due to various actions already taken by the coordinating team, and obviously over the next 6 months we will probably be taking more. So in addition to that, we have a balance sheet to die for. That's figuratively, of course. We have no debt on our buildings or 9 acres of land plus freestone. We have an endowment worth $1.5 million, and we literally have cash that we are holding, $523,000 that we have just raised for building investments, plus another almost $300,000 more in pledges that will be coming in. We have an extraordinary music program with the newly leathered organ, and the human capital within and outside our walls is tremendous. When you think about our end of being an active and dynamic partner and the things that we have been doing and increasingly doing over the last year or so with immigration, working with Cisco and the partnership that's going to be voted at this particular meeting, our partnership with the Greater Richmond Interfaith Program, the Read Aloud program, what we've been doing with the UU Legislative Ministry, particularly with Prop 8 a few years ago, the UU Service Committee, climate change, a new group that's formed around that. In addition, we have 6 community ministers that work outside the walls of this church and have a tremendous amount of resource that they work with us on too. There are several former ministers, either retired or working in other places, people like Craig Scott, who's working with the immigration and our Cisco relationship, or many of you have probably attended one of the excellent seminars put on by Jay Atkinson. We also have a professional family ministry that's bringing us the stability to really work with our families. And Maren Clough is a true gift to this congregation, and she's just been here for a few months. So the point I want to make is we're a long way from a financial catastrophe. Or are we? And this is where it gets messy. Let's start out with what's been happening at the UU Church of Berkeley in membership since 1994. To orient you to this graph, it starts with, this is literally the total number of members from 1994 through 2014. And you can see where we started at about 600, and we have dropped over the years down to our latest one, which is about 425. That heavy dark line that you see is a linear regression. Excel does that for me. And really what it means is a trend that's been continuing to go down at a pretty standard rate over the last few years. That's particularly major, and it's not because we are losing more people. In fact, every year we lose fewer, either percentage-wise or in total, than we did 10 years ago. The issue is that we are not getting as many new members. So let me orient you to this chart. This is the actual number of new members who signed the book starting back in January of 2002. And it goes all the way through January of 2014. So those blue lines that go up and down are the actual numbers, and you can see it bounces anywhere from 0 up to as high as 14. And back in 2002, 2003, then again, that heavy dark line is what's called a rolling 12-month average. So what it means is the beginning on the left-hand side of that line is the average of the previous 12 months. If it's going up, it means that the month you are adding is more than the month you're dropping. And if it's going down, it means the month you're adding is less than the month that you're dropping. So it really shows at any one time what our annual average is starting back in 2002 and going through 2014. So back in 2003, we were adding on average as high as 5 members a month. And that was pretty much stable around 4 members a month through 2004, 5, 6, 7, 8. And then in 2009, it took a drop down to 3 and pretty much stayed there. And now that's pretty much where it is. And so the reason that we are losing membership is because we are having fewer new members, not because we are losing more people. And membership makes a huge difference because nearly 70% of our revenues come from our members. Here you can see the big chunks. Pledging brings in just slightly over half of our revenues. The non-pledge contributions, there are people who contribute but don't actually pledge, is about another 10%. Programs, Thursday night suppers, things like that, are mostly done by members. And you can see that's about another 4%, with fundraising about 2%. Our rentals and our endowment, the big chunks that are not directly from our members, you can see are about 30%. And then where are we spending it? Because we bring in about $1 million a year, and you can see the biggest chunks where we spend it is in our facilities. That's about 23%. Administration, about 22%. Our co-ministry, 16%, and on around, music, 11%. I do have information that shows what is in each one of these major pieces, what we're spending on, and the number of people. I'm not going to go through it here, but you'll find it in a printout of this presentation back on the member table. When we look at our expense in total, back starting in 2008 through last year, you can see that we've really held our expenses pretty stable and, in fact, decreased them over the last 3 years. Now, that's total expenses. If we add wages and salaries and the benefits for our employees, you can see those 2 lines that I've added. So wages and salaries themselves, you can see, run about half of what our total expenses are. And then if you add in the benefits, we're really talking about 2/3. So 2/3 of our total expense is really in the people that are employed here. So the point I'd like to make is that we have controlled our expenses, but we've done it primarily by controlling the salaries of our employees. In fact, over half who work at least 20 hours per week at this church do not meet minimum UUA recommended salary levels. Now, the UUA recommended salary levels is a survey that is done either every year or every other year around the United States. So it goes to other churches, other nonprofits with comparable responsibilities, and it surveys all that salary information, and then it categorizes it by the size of the church, so it's the level of responsibility, as well as the geographic area. Because obviously there are some geographic areas that are very expensive to live in. We are one of those. And so when we look at the guidelines, they are specifically for a church of our size living in a geography where we live. And about over half of our employees do not meet the minimum of those guidelines. If we were to bring everyone to at least minimum, that's about $44,000 a year. And if we brought everyone to at least the midpoint, which is the expectation that after 3 to 5 years, if an employee is in fact meeting all the requirements of their job, that's where they should be, it would cost us another $173,000 a year. And I would point out that about 40% of that is our co-ministers. Neither of our co-ministers meet even the minimum of what the UUA recommends for that particular position for a church of our size. In addition to that, we're talking also at this particular congregational meeting about the investment needed in our buildings. We need another $200,000 to $250,000 a year to invest in our buildings once the current capital funds are used. And I would expect the current capital funds will take us over the next three to 5 years. And beyond that, we're going to need another $200,000 to $250,000 a year. So let's look at what this looks like going forward, because we could probably kind of go along the way we have been going along for some time. So if I look at 2020 and just extend that membership trend that we were looking at before to 2020, it looks like we'd end up with about 400 members. And if we assume just a modest increase in pledges and plate contributions, assume no building reserve, no investment in buildings beyond what we had in 2013 or 14 in capital funds, we'd probably be okay, because 7 years have gone by, but we can kind of get by without doing that. And we would need a modest reduction in employee hours to make up for healthcare increases. We would have minimum salary increases, if any. So we would go even more behind in terms of what the recommended guidelines are for our employees. We would have one called minister. We would need to have a reduction in the hours that the church are open, most likely, to be able to adjust for the employee hours that needed to be decreased. We would have fewer paid second section leaders. We're reducing everything here, so I'm goring everyone's ox. And we would need to start limiting our childcare. It's a scenario that works. Whether or not we would like to have it is another question. Let's take it even further to 2030. Now we're talking about 310 members. Modest increase in pledges and plate contributions. No building reserve or investment in the buildings beyond 2013-14. Now we've gone 15 years without any additional investment in the building. Think about that for a minute and what that means. And the idea of having a capital campaign, of course, with 300 members might be a little bit different than what it was this time. You'd need at least a 25% reduction in employee costs. One called minister, about a 30% reduction in the hours the church are open. No paid section leaders or children's choir. Very limited childcare. It's a scenario that works, but I'm not sure it's someplace that we want to go. And I would submit we don't have to go there. There's two things we need to work on. One is to turn around our membership and our pledging trends and come up with an additional source of funds to cover the building investment. So, what can you do? Well, first of all, pay your pledge by June 30th. And if you're having difficulty meeting your pledge, let us know, because that helps with our planning and for the coordinating team to be financially responsible to this congregation. If you haven't made one, please do. It really helps us with our budgeting. Secondly, invite a friend. Even without Barbara and Bill here, inviting most of the people who come because they're invited by a friend or a family member. In fact, Advisory Council member asked me what would happen if every member brought one first-time visitor once a year. Well, we would more than triple the number of first-time visitors, and we could add in a single year as many as 60 new members. That's how powerful inviting people is. Of course, don't be afraid to try something new. When we think about membership and about worship services, there's a lot of new things that are coming. And particularly, talk to Paul Hudson and Lonnie Mosley. These two, as you heard just a little bit ago, have been named as being the new membership ministry co-chairs. And they've got a lot of new ideas about things to do using social media, and we can help. And so talk to Paul and Lonnie about that. If I were to pick a single, what's called a leading indicator, this would be it. A leading indicator is something that's used in business and in economics to mean if this starts to happen or starts to change or starts to move, it's a good indicator of what's going to happen in the future. So if I were going to pick one thing that was an indicator about the sustainability of the UU Church of Berkeley, it would be monthly first-time visitors. This chart is similar to the new members. You can see again, it starts in January of 2002, goes to January of 2014. The blue lines that go up and down are the actual number of monthly first-time visitors per month. And then again, that heavy dark line is the rolling average. So you can see back in 2002, the average for the month was really pushing pretty close to almost 35, pretty high. And then it dropped down to, maybe bounce between maybe 25 and 30 for a little bit. And think about that. That means 300, 350, 400 visitors in a year. And then it kind of settled in around, up and down around 25. So you can see there times 12, that's about 300 per year. And then back at the end of 2009, You can see it really took a drop down to 20, an average of 20 per month. That's about 240, and it's been steadily going down ever since, down to about 15, whereas that's why we had a really low number of first-time visitors, 133 last month. Now, I'm also an optimist, even though this is not a particularly optimistic chart. I would like to have you look at those last few months over on the right-hand side, how they're going back up. I don't think this is an accident. What this says is it looks like it could be turning around. And while I acknowledge that 3 months does not a trend make, I think we're doing some things that really could impact this. Number one, we hired Marion Clough to have a stable family ministry. It's been shown in other churches to really make a difference. Putting Lonnie and Paul coming with new ideas about how to do things for outreach, some of the work with social media makes a difference. And I think our continued work about being out in the community, working with Cisco, being visible, makes a difference in terms of people actually seeing us and monthly and first-time visitors finding us and be able to come here. The other thing that I would ask you to do is to really have the hard conversations. One of the big ones is whether or not we are willing to develop part of our land. I'm also chairing a land use task force that's looking at developing 9 acres below our fire road. There'll be a report given on this just in a few minutes later on in this congregational meeting. And even the question that's very hard to ask is, do we belong on this hill? And I can argue either side of that one. But it's a conversation that we as a congregation need to have. If we want to stay on this hill, there's some things we need to do. If we want to consider leaving this hill, that's not necessarily the solution, but it's a conversation we need to talk about. And then just as important, are we willing to experiment with how we do church? Are we willing to stand up and dance, for example, the way that we did last week? Doing church to the extent that people want to come and feel comfortable here, the world is changing. There are many people that are unchurched, and being able to come here, feel comfortable, and want to come back because this is the kind of place that could be their community is important for us to look at. So let me address kind of my bottom line. The capital campaign bought us 3 to 5 years to address the trends that otherwise could make leaving this hill a necessity instead of a choice. So are we willing to stay at the table over the next few years to make this an engaged and sustainable community? I started with these words from Joe Cherry. If we have any hope of transforming the world and changing ourselves, we must be bold enough to step into our discomfort, brave enough to be clumsy there, loving enough to forgive ourselves and others. And now let me finish it. May we, as a people of faith, be granted the strength to be so bold and so loving.